Marjorie Taylor Greene mocked Jasmine Crockett's long black lashes during a live congressional hearing. What she didn't expect? Jasmine calmly exposed 15 years of racial injustice and left the entire room speechless. The moment sparked over 50,000 letters from women across America. So what did Jasmine say that turned ridicule into a revolution? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. They called it the Mirror Room, a congressional hearing room not for what it contained, but for what it revealed. Beneath the cold fluorescence and polished stone, this chamber had a reputation. Everything said here echoed louder, cut deeper, and reflected not only truth, but the biases hiding beneath polished rhetoric. On this particular morning, the room pulsed with anticipation. The subject was freedom, personal liberties, selective enforcement, and the growing shadow of racial disparity in the American justice system. But everyone knew beneath the official agenda, something far more volatile was about to erupt. At the center of it all sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, composed, poised, and unmistakably unafraid. Her skin gleamed like polished mahogany under the lights, her tailored black blazer sharp against the white of the walls. But it was her eyes that drew the most attention. Clear, defiant, framed by long black lashes that refused to bow, like shields guarding a truth too long ignored. In a room where women like her were still treated as visitors rather than architects, she didn't ask for space. She occupied it. Every move, every breath, felt like a protest wrapped in grace. Directly across from her sat Marjorie Taylor Greene, draped not in policy, but in performance. She leaned back with the smugness of someone used to hearing her own voice echo, hands resting on arms like a judge waiting to strike. Greene wasn't here to deliberate. She was here to provoke, to diminish, to remind everyone that power, in her world, still looked a certain way. She eyed Jasmine not like a colleague, but like an intruder. And in that moment, the hearing stopped being about justice. It became a battlefield. One side armed with facts and history, the other with ego and venom. And the whole nation was about to witness the collision. The silence between them, thin as glass, was about to crack. And when it did, it would cut deep. Jasmine had just begun to speak, her voice calm, measured. The kind of tone forged by years of being interrupted, but never silenced. If we're going to be honest about freedom, she began, we have to admit it's not the same for everyone. Some people get off with a warning. Others go to jail for doing the same thing. She gestured lightly toward the file in front of her, filled with statistics and case studies. And that's not random. It has a lot to do with skin color, where someone lives, and the assumptions people make before anyone speaks. But before she could finish the thought, Greene leaned forward with a sneer. The interruption came swift and sharp, like a slap across a sentence. I think your fake eyelashes are messing with your reading comprehension. The words seemed small on the surface, almost trivial, but they fell into the room like a boulder into still water, sending invisible shockwaves through every wall, every breath, every bone. In an instant, the energy shifted. Aides froze mid-sentence. Reporters dropped pens, and even the marble walls seemed to draw in tighter, recoiling from the venom laced in those few syllables. It wasn't simply about lashes. It wasn't about makeup. It was about undermining intellect, erasing professionalism, reducing a woman, a black woman, to a caricature crafted by centuries of spite. The insult didn't strike Jasmine's skin. It drove into the history etched into her very existence, into a legacy of being judged not by words spoken, but by hair texture, skin tone, facial features deemed too much. Around them, time itself seemed to stutter and hold. There was no rustle of papers, no tapping of keys, no coughs from bored attendees, only a thick, almost suffocating silence, as if the mirror room itself understood that something sacred had just been violated. In the architecture of this imagined space, a massive pane of crystal-clear glass, built of unspoken respect and the fragile premise of equality, suddenly cracked. Not a surface crack, but a deep, groaning fracture that ran jagged from one invisible corner to another, splitting the room into a before and after. The message Greene sent was clear. Not only did she question Jasmine's arguments, she questioned her capacity to reason, her right to be taken seriously at all. It was a lunge not just at policy points, but at personhood, a blow meant to diminish, humiliate, and dehumanize under the camouflage of a joke. And the worst injustice was how familiar it was, how easily cruelty could be masked as just a comment, and how often the burden fell on the wounded to rise above it without making too much noise. But instead of giving Greene the reaction she craved, Jasmine gave the room something far heavier, a silence that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. She didn't blink, didn't move, didn't even flinch. Instead, she lowered her eyes slowly, as if the room itself had become too loud to look at. Her fingers, steady but tense, slid across the surface of the table and came to rest on the thick DOJ file she had brought with her, its edges marked, its pages flagged, its spine worn from nights of research. She didn't clutch it. She didn't use it as a shield. She simply touched it gently, with the kind of reverence you reserve for things that carry more than just paper, things that carry names, families, injustices. She took in one long, controlled breath through her nose and let it out through her mouth, her body still as stone. She wasn't fighting to control her anger. She was choosing to honor it differently, not with fire, but with memory. And in that moment, her mind slipped from the sterile cold of the hearing room to a burning Dallas sidewalk over 20 years ago. She was 10. Her mother, Clara, had spent that whole morning getting ready. Jasmine still remembered how carefully she'd pressed her white blouse, how she dabbed on lipstick in the mirror of their tiny apartment. Not too bright, just enough to look professional. Her heels clicked with pride when she walked. Jasmine had believed back then that if you looked nice and worked hard, people would treat you with respect. But standing outside that upscale salon, she learned something else. Clara walked in with a smile and a portfolio full of stunning hairstyles, boxed braids, silk presses, wedding updos, sculpted buns, years of work captured in glossy photos. But within 30 seconds, Jasmine saw the woman at the desk look her mother up and down, lips tight, eyes blank. And then she said it, quiet but clear. "Sorry, we're not hiring right now." Clara didn't argue. She just nodded once and turned around slowly, trying to keep her shoulders from falling. Jasmine met her at the door, and she could see it in her mother's eyes. That look of swallowing something bitter again. But what hurt the most wasn't the rejection. It was the lie. Because just 5 minutes later, another woman, white, blonde, with barely a folder in hand, walked in and got the job on the spot. Jasmine saw it with her own eyes. Clara said nothing. They just walked home together in silence, her heels suddenly too loud against the pavement. And in that silence, Jasmine made a silent vow she would carry with her forever. They will never look at me like that without hearing what I have to say. The memory burned behind her eyes, but when Jasmine opened them again, she didn't bring back pain. She brought something sharper, heavier, the unshakable calm of someone who knew exactly who she was. Her lashes lifted first, slow and deliberate, not trembling with rage, but standing tall with the weight of resolve. She sat up straighter in her chair, the leather groaning quietly beneath her, as if even the furniture knew the temperature of the room had changed. Greene was still smirking across from her, basking in the false triumph of her cheap insult. But Jasmine didn't look at her. Not yet. She let the silence stretch, let it grow heavy enough that even those trying to avoid eye contact could feel its pressure sink into their skin. When she finally spoke, her voice was not loud, not sharp, but smooth and deadly. The kind of calm that signals a storm has decided exactly where to strike. "If my intelligence is so fragile," Jasmine said, her words falling into the air like iron weights, "that a little makeup could threaten it." She let the pause stretch, razor thin and electric, before continuing, her gaze locking onto Greene with a force that could split mountains. "Then maybe what you're really afraid of isn't my lashes at all. It's what I'm about to say next." The words didn't erupt in rage. They landed with a heavy finality, like a gavel striking the end of a long, crooked trial. And for the first time since the attack, it was Greene who shifted uncomfortably, realizing too late that she had not silenced Jasmine Crockett. She had only unleashed her. And just like that, with one sentence, Jasmine didn't just reclaim her dignity. She put the truth on trial. She didn't glance back at Greene. She didn't even blink in her direction. Instead, Jasmine reached forward with calm, deliberate precision and flipped open the thick DOJ report that had been sitting silently between them the entire hearing. The weight of it alone sent a subtle message. Hundreds of pages, months of investigation, years of pain captured in black ink and hard numbers. She didn't pound the table. She didn't shout. She tapped a single page, then lifted her eyes to meet the panel. "This," she said, her voice level and quiet, "is what it looks like when a system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do." The room didn't move. No one shifted in their chairs. No one coughed or whispered, because Jasmine had just flipped the hearing upside down, and now every pair of eyes was glued to her, not out of politeness, but necessity. She turned the first page. "Mississippi," she began, "over 400 cases reviewed, and black defendants received sentences 30 to 40% longer than white defendants for the same offenses. Not similar, the same. Same charges, same history, different skin." Her tone never wavered. She turned another page. "In Georgia," she continued, "a single district attorney charged 12 black teenagers as adults for nonviolent drug crimes over a 4-year period. During that same period, not one white minor faced adult prosecution. Not one." Flip. In Louisiana, where Congresswoman Greene once praised the strict and fair judges on record, she paused slightly here, letting the irony linger. Multiple public defenders testified that black clients were pressured into plea deals under threat of longer sentences, even when evidence was weak or non-existent. The pages made no sound as they turned, but every word Jasmine spoke landed like a drumbeat. She wasn't reading, she was revealing, line by line, state by state, the anatomy of an injustice no one in that room could pretend not to see anymore. She turned to Alabama next, lifting a tab section. 2 judges still sitting on the bench today were exposed for using coded racial slurs in official email chains. They were investigated internally. No charges, no suspensions, no apologies. They're still wearing the robe. Her hand didn't shake as she said it. Her voice didn't crack. But the air around her had grown so still, it felt like the entire chamber was holding its breath. And it wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it, with restraint, with clarity, with the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing the truth is finally louder than the insult. She paused, then slowly closed the folder. "These aren't opinions," she said, her voice just above a whisper now, but somehow stronger than before. "They're patterns, and patterns don't lie. People do." And as Jasmine closed the last page of the DOJ report, the silence that followed was no longer empty. It was charged, volatile, like the air just before a lightning strike. The silence wasn't polite anymore. It was heavy, stretched, almost painful, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. No one moved. No one dared. Because for the first time in that room, truth didn't come dressed in a tailored gray suit with polished shoes and a neutral tone. It came wrapped in brown skin, framed by long black lashes and delivered in a voice too calm to ignore. Jasmine didn't need to yell. She didn't need to provoke. Her presence alone had done what years of memos and ignored reports couldn't. It made people look up, listen, and feel. The facts she read had been buried in inboxes, filed away in footnotes, brushed off in panels where the only people allowed to speak were the ones never affected by the injustice. But now those same facts had found a body. A woman who didn't just read the numbers. She carried the weight of them in her own family, her own skin, her own lived experience. It wasn't just what she said. It was that someone like her was saying it, and saying it without flinching. The people in the room weren't just hearing data. They were being confronted by the reality that for the first time, the voice of justice didn't sound like theirs. And that terrified them more than any report ever could. Because when truth comes with lashes, with gloss, with a name like Jasmine Crockett, it forces the question no one wanted to answer. What if the system isn't broken, just designed to ignore people like her? And just when it seemed the truth had finally claimed the room, Greene reached again, not for clarity, but for cruelty. She leaned forward in her chair, tapping her manicured nail against the polished wood as if bored, her voice dripping with that same artificial sweetness used to dress up contempt. B6, she said, tilting her head with mock curiosity, her smirk widening. What is that? A new makeup shade? A few in the room blinked. No one laughed. Not even her own aides dared meet her eyes. It was a cheap line, but it was delivered with the confidence of someone who had been rewarded their whole life for making pain look like punchlines. What she had just heard, the statistics, the cases, the patterns of injustice, hadn't been challenged, couldn't be denied. So instead, she did what power always tries to do when it's cornered. Reduce it, minimize it, turn it into something small and shallow, something disposable like eyeliner or blush. Greene wasn't asking a question. She was swinging at dignity with sarcasm, trying to yank the room back to where truth didn't matter. Only image did. But this time, the air didn't bend to her. It held, heavy and unmoved, because everyone in that room knew what she was doing. And for the first time, her voice, sharp, smug, and familiar, sounded less like authority and more like fear pretending to be in control. For a long moment, Greene's words hung in the air, empty and sour, and then Jasmine smiled. For a long moment, Greene's words hung in the air, empty and sour, and then Jasmine smiled. It wasn't a forced smile. It wasn't bitter or shaken. It was quiet, composed, and unshakably sure. The kind of smile that didn't beg for validation, but delivered warning. Jasmine didn't rush. She sat in the silence Greene had created with her own mockery and let it ferment just long enough to become unbearable. And when she spoke, her voice was low, smooth, and steady, but every word landed like a verdict. B6, she said, turning slightly in her chair so both the cameras and the committee could see her, isn't makeup. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was surgical, as if she were placing a scalpel exactly where it needed to go. It's Section B6 of the Department of Justice's Pattern or Practice Investigations, the provision that outlines evidence of systemic discrimination in courts, policing, and sentencing. Her fingers tapped the DOJ file gently, as if to remind the room that everything she was saying was already on record. And today, she continued, meeting Greene's gaze directly for the first time since the insult, B6 has a face. The pause that followed didn't come from hesitation. It came from control. And then, with perfect precision, she finished. It's mine. The room didn't gasp. It exhaled. Suddenly, collectively, like everyone had been holding their breath and didn't realize it until that moment. Chairs creaked as people shifted forward without meaning to. A reporter's pen stopped mid-word. Even the low hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to pull back, as if silence itself needed to make room for what had just been said. Jasmine hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't snapped or mocked back, but she had flipped the power dynamic in a way that couldn't be undone. She had taken a legal clause, one buried in bureaucratic language, and turned it into something human, something visible, something no one in that room could now unsee. She had taken a number, a section, a code, and turned it into flesh and truth and challenge. And in doing so, she hadn't just answered Greene. She had reframed the entire hearing. Across the room, Greene's smirk faltered for the first time. Not in shame, that emotion was too distant for her, but in confusion. Her face tightened slightly, the muscles around her eyes pulling inward, like someone trying to understand how they had lost control of a conversation they had started. But Jasmine wasn't watching for a reaction. She didn't need one. The statement wasn't for Greene. It was for everyone who had ever been told to quiet down, to sit back, to blend in. For everyone who had ever been dismissed, diminished, or discredited because of how they looked or spoke or prayed or wore their hair. Jasmine had put a mirror in front of them all. And for the first time, the reflection wasn't polished and polite. It was raw, undeniable, and wearing lashes, Greene thought she could laugh away. The moment rippled far beyond the hearing room. In the press box, one reporter mouthed the words, "She said B6 has a face," as if confirming it for their own notes, or maybe to make sure they hadn't imagined it. A producer at a news network clipped the quote instantly and fired it off to the control room. Inside minutes, it would scroll across television screens nationwide. And online, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, the phrase ignited like dry grass to a match. The hashtag was simple, powerful, and impossible to ignore. B6 has a face. Within half an hour, it was trending across every major platform. People began posting their own photos. Young black women holding DOJ reports, law students writing the clause number across their notebooks, activists sharing footage of Jasmine's lines synced with music, dubbed over courtroom footage like it belonged in a movie. But it wasn't a movie, it was real, and it was happening now. Back in the hearing room, no one interrupted her. No one tried to cut in. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't push. She let the moment breathe. Let it settle like dust into every fold of power and privilege in that space. She knew better than to speak again. She had said enough. The force of her words came not from volume, but from clarity, from the kind of truth that didn't knock the door down, but unlocked it and waited for people to walk through. Even the chairman, normally quick to regain order, sat still for a beat too long, as if unsure whether to speak or stand, or simply acknowledge that something irreversible had just taken place. And Jasmine sat quietly, letting it all happen around her. Composed, centered, the living proof that B6 was no longer just policy. It was presence. She didn't look around the room for reactions. She didn't need to. Her job was never to please anyone in that room. Her job was to speak what was real and let the weight of it fall where it may. She had come into that hearing already knowing the system wouldn't want to hear her voice. She came anyway. And when she was mocked, she didn't fold. She clarified. When they tried to turn her into a punchline, she turned the table. And when the moment came to define who controlled the conversation, she didn't just take it, she redefined it. Because in that moment, under fluorescent lights in front of stone faces and frozen cameras, truth had long black lashes. Truth wore a gold cross. Truth didn't yell, and truth didn't ask permission. It sat, smiled, and said, "It's me." And while the room echoed with the impact of her words, Jasmine knew this wasn't the first time someone had tried to make her smaller for simply showing up in her own skin. She had long since stopped being surprised by the way people reacted to her appearance. Not because she didn't care, but because she had grown used to power disguising itself as critique. She remembered the press conference clearly. Bright lights, a crowded chamber, and one reporter, press suit and smug grin, who waited until the end of the briefing to ask his question. Not about her policy, not about her bill, but about her look. "Representative Crockett," he said, leaning forward just enough to make it performative. "Some have said your style is a little loud for Capitol Hill. Is that intentional?" The air had shifted immediately. She saw the way aides paused mid-note, how even seasoned correspondents raised eyebrows, unsure whether to look at her or at their feet. Jasmine hadn't flinched. She had smiled. But it wasn't the smile of someone amused. It was the smile of someone who had spent her entire career being reduced to an outfit before being respected for an argument. "Intentional?" she repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air like smoke. "Yes, just like the way I read every line of every bill before I put my name on it." The room hadn't clapped, but the silence afterward was louder than any applause. Because deep down, they knew what had just happened. A woman had refused to shrink, and instead stood up taller, in heels. That wasn't the only time it happened. On the campaign trail, it had been worse. At a town hall in East Texas, she'd shaken hands for nearly an hour, answered questions about infrastructure, voting rights, and housing reform, only to have a man pull her aside afterward and say, "You're smart, no doubt, but you might be a better fit for television than for office. Too polished, too much." He'd smiled like it was a compliment. She'd smiled like it wasn't. Another voter, a middle-aged woman with a party pin and perfect pearls, once told a reporter in earshot, "I like her fire, but she's a branding problem. She looks more like an Instagram personality than a public servant." That quote had made it into 3 local articles. One outlet even used it as a headline. "Crockett, a style star, but can she lead?" They never asked that about men with pocket squares or custom-tailored suits. They never questioned the seriousness of those who wore power the way they were told to. But for Jasmine, every accessory, every red nail, every gold earring, every flick of her lashes was seen as a signal that she was playing dress up in a space not built for her. But she never changed. She never softened her walk or dimmed her colors. She drafted bills in full glam. She cross-examined officials with crimson nails tapping legal pads. She stood on courthouse steps in power suits and platform heels because she didn't believe professionalism meant invisibility. When critics called her style distracting, she wrote stronger legislation. When donors whispered that her look might alienate moderates, she won votes in counties they thought she'd never touch. She protected tenants from eviction, secured public defense funding, and tore through policy loopholes while wearing lashes they said were too long. Because for Jasmine, there was never a line between what she wore and what she stood for. Both were armor, both were hers, and both had every right to take up space in the halls of power. She knew that to some, her presence felt like disruption, but to her it was restoration. Not a challenge to the system, but a correction to the story it told about who belonged inside it. There was a particular kind of exhaustion that came from having to prove twice as much, just to be called half as capable. Jasmine lived with that weight every day, and yet she never let it crush her. She used it, turned it into policy, into purpose, into presence. Every insult, every backhanded comment, every whisper that she was too flashy or not serious enough became fuel. Not for revenge, but for results. Because what her critics didn't understand was that she never needed their permission. She didn't ask to be invited in. She walked in on her own terms, unapologetically, unsoftened, and exactly as she was. And now, seated under fluorescent lights, having just turned a federal clause into a national headline, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a woman with long lashes and red nails. She was the embodiment of everything the system tried to mute and couldn't. She wasn't there to blend in. She was there to be seen, fully, clearly. And finally, after years of being told to tone it down, she had made it undeniable. Style was never the distraction. It was the declaration. And while the courtroom slowly exhaled, outside its walls, the real eruption had already begun. It started with a single photo, a grainy, unfiltered selfie taken by a college student in Atlanta, her eyes framed by long, curled lashes, a caption written in bold defiance. "For the record, mine are real. But even if they weren't, they'd still hold truth. Yeah, my lashes speak truth." Within minutes, it was reposted hundreds of times. By the hour, thousands. By the end of the day, it had become a movement. Across the country, women, especially Black women, began flooding timelines with their own photos, stories, and scars. Some were lawyers in power suits. Some were high school girls in uniforms. Some were hairstylists in small-town salons holding DOJ printouts beside handheld mirrors. All of them had the same message. I am not too much. I am not the distraction. I am the witness. The phrase took flight not because it was clever, but because it was earned. Forged in a moment when one woman, under attack, refused to bend and instead turned mockery into meaning. The hashtag spread like wildfire because it wasn't about beauty. It was about battle. A history of being told to tone it down, to look more professional, to blend in. But now blending in was no longer the goal. Being seen was. Teachers in Detroit wore their lashes bold the next morning, even the ones who usually kept it subtle, taking photos at their desks with lesson plans in one hand and the hashtag in the other. Baristas in Oakland wore red lipstick and gold hoops under their visors. Nursing students in Baltimore posed in hospital scrubs, holding up copies of B6 policy pages taped to their clipboards. A woman in Jackson, Mississippi wrote, "They mocked her lashes, but her lashes held more law than the man in the robe." And with each post, something unspoken was being rewritten. An entire generation of women no longer apologizing for showing up full. In Chicago, a nail tech named Kiara gathered her clients for a group photo. 7 Black women, all wearing long lashes and holding signs that read, DOJ Section B6. Ask me about it. In New York, a group of middle school girls recreated Jasmine's courtroom pose for a civics class project, presenting a slideshow on systemic bias and media framing. One girl added a final slide with her own quote, "If lashes can carry truth, so can I." On a bus in Dallas, a grandmother leaned over to her granddaughter, pointed at Jasmine's photo in the news app on her phone, and whispered, "This is why I told you to never let them shame your shine." And in that single moment, the power of it crystallized. This wasn't just trending. It was transforming. The backlash came, of course, as it always does. Pundits called it performative. Anonymous commenters said it was focusing on the wrong things. One cable anchor sarcastically asked, "What's next? Hashtags about eyeliner." But the momentum didn't flinch, because this time the answer wasn't defensive, it was declarative. Yes, if it starts with eyeliner, if it starts with lashes and leads to truth, then so be it. Let it start there. Let it start with what they mock. Let it start with what they underestimate. Because the point was never about lashes. The point was about who gets to tell the truth and how much dignity they're allowed to bring with them when they do. Even in spaces that once stayed silent, something shifted. Congressional aides who'd never worn extensions began doing so in quiet solidarity. Legal scholars cited Jasmine's hearing in op-eds titled, "The Optics of Power When Appearance Becomes Protest." The DOJ's public download numbers for Section B6 tripled in less than 48 hours. And quietly, in cities across the country, law school applications from Black women spiked. Not because Jasmine had asked them to, but because she had reminded them they never needed permission. It wasn't just a moment, it was a mirror. And the country, for once, was forced to see not just the policy, but the person. Not just the clause, but the courage. And through every phone screen, classroom, cubicle, and courthouse, that image echoed again and again. Jasmine Crockett, lashes long, eyes steady, voice clear, making history not in spite of how she looked, but with it. For every time someone said too loud, too bold, too extra, too much, she had offered something no insult could crush, a vision of leadership that didn't shrink to fit the room, one that dared to fill it. Because sometimes the most radical act isn't just telling the truth, it's doing it with red nails and lashes they swore would never be taken seriously, until the whole nation stopped and listened. While hashtags surged and salons became safe havens of solidarity, the people at the center of the storm made very different choices. Greene vanished. One day she was everywhere, smirking into microphones, issuing sound bites designed to stir rage or laughter, and the next she was nowhere to be found. Reporters waited outside her office, but the blinds stayed drawn. She skipped her next scheduled appearance on a right-wing morning show. Her press team released a cold, vague statement about partisan theater, but she herself said nothing. Her silence didn't come from humility, it came from strategy, the quiet calculation of someone trying to wait out a firestorm without fanning it. But the silence spoke louder than any spin. And in contrast, on the other side of the chaos, Jasmine Crockett was receiving so much mail, her staff had to rent temporary storage space to hold it. Over 50,000 messages poured in, not from politicians or donors or talking heads, but from women, mothers, daughters, teachers, stylists, judges, janitors, students, all of them reaching for her voice like a lifeline, and writing as if they'd been waiting years for permission to finally say what they felt. The letters came in boxes, the emails in thousands. The social media messages scrolled for hours without end. Many were brief. "Thank you." Some were angry. "I've lived this too, and I'm tired of pretending it's not real." Others were stories, vivid, painful, glorious, of women who had spent their entire lives being told to be less. One woman from Ohio wrote, "My first boss told me I'd get promoted faster if I wore beige instead of red. I wore red the next day. Thank you for making me feel like I wasn't wrong." A former judge from Michigan admitted she had stayed silent for years, afraid of losing respect for not looking the part, and ended her letter with, "Not anymore." And in the middle of the pile, tucked into a small purple envelope with stickers along the edges, was a handwritten note from a 13-year-old girl in Mississippi. The handwriting was careful, like someone who had erased and rewritten many lines. It began simply, "Dear Congresswoman Crockett, my name is Anya, and I saw you on TV with my mom. You made me feel proud to look like me." Jasmine sat in her office long after sunset, reading the letter with the city lights flickering behind her like distant camera flashes. Her team had left for the night. The room was quiet, but in her hands she held something louder than any applause she'd received. Ania's words continued, "Sometimes I feel like I talk too loud or wear too much lip gloss and people laugh. But when you talked, nobody laughed. They listened. You said B6 had a face, and it was you. But it kind of felt like it was me too." Jasmine paused, blinking back something fierce and full behind her eyes. The letter ended with a single sentence, written larger than the rest. "I want to be a lawyer when I grow up, and keep my long lashes, just like you." It hit her like a quiet explosion. Not with fire, but with gravity. Not because of the praise, but because she understood exactly what it meant to be that girl. To wonder if the very things that made you feel beautiful were the same things keeping others from hearing your brilliance. To have power in you and still feel like you had to edit yourself to make it palatable. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, still holding the letter, and remembered being 13, writing essays about Thurgood Marshall in the daytime and practicing eyeliner in the mirror at night, not knowing yet that she could be both fierce and flawless and still be taken seriously. And now someone else was watching her and daring to believe the same. This wasn't the kind of victory that made headlines. There was no applause, no committee vote, no flashing, breaking news banner. But it was a victory just the same, maybe even the one that mattered more. Because policies change slowly. Courts bend over decades. But a 13-year-old girl deciding she doesn't have to hide to be taken seriously? That's how generations turn. That's how the system loses its grip. Not all at once, but one brave voice at a time, echoing louder because someone dared to speak first. Jasmine folded the letter gently and placed it inside her desk drawer, beside a framed photo of her mother and a first draft of her equal sentencing reform bill. She didn't need a trophy. She had a letter from a girl who now believed she could be powerful without apology. Holding Anya's letter in her hands, Jasmine knew that inspiring one girl wasn't enough. Not when there were millions more still being told they had to shrink to succeed. She didn't wait for permission. She never had. The next morning, Jasmine Crockett walked into her press conference in Washington, not just as a congresswoman, but as a woman on a mission. The media had been buzzing since the night before. Rumors flying about an announcement, guesses ranging from a Senate run to a new podcast. No one expected what came next. Flanked by two staffers and dressed in a bold crimson blazer, she stood behind the podium, placed her hands down, and said with absolute clarity, "Every dollar earned from my new beauty collaboration, every single cent, will go to scholarships for Black girls who want to go to law school." The room, already humming with camera clicks, seemed to freeze. Some reporters blinked. Others raised their pens mid-sentence. Jasmine didn't pause. The collection is called the Clapback Collection. You've probably heard the word used like an insult to describe women who speak up, speak back, and speak out. But to us, it means survival. It means standing in our truth, even when they try to laugh us off the stage. Her voice was steady. Her tone was unshakable. And for the first time in a long time, every journalist in the room was forced to write faster just to keep up. The collection itself had gone viral overnight. Bold lashes named Section B6, nail colors titled Testimony Red and Courtroom Gold. A line of hair products co-branded with Black-owned beauty labs and infused with quotes from the hearing. Not a distraction. A declaration. What began as a moment of defense had transformed into a movement of offense, reclaiming power not just in law books, but on vanities and bathroom counters across the country. And Jasmine didn't just lend her name to it. She designed it. She handpicked the shades. She wrote every quote on the packaging. Because she knew that in a world where appearance had always been used as a weapon to disqualify, to silence, to erase, it was time to weaponize joy, pride, and cultural identity in return. She smiled as the cameras flashed, not because she was proud of launching a product, but because she had finally turned the thing they mocked into a resource they couldn't touch. But she didn't stop there. After the press conference, Jasmine headed straight for the Capitol. With her staff close behind and a leather folder under her arm, she walked into the legislative chamber with the same determination she'd shown in courtrooms, protests, and budget hearings. She had learned early that you can't change a system by only surviving it. You have to confront it where it lives. And so she submitted a bill, bold, blunt, unapologetic. Its title printed in thick black font on the front, the Appearance Equity Act, the first of its kind. A federal measure designed to ban discrimination in the workplace based on hair texture, cultural hairstyles, nail color, religious garments, and traditional clothing. Everything that had been called unprofessional for generations, but never once proven to impact job performance. She stood at the clerk's desk, handed over the papers, and said aloud, "Because professionalism was never supposed to be a disguise for racism." She didn't need applause. She needed signatures. The journey to this bill had been written in microaggressions, in interviews where she was asked about her wardrobe instead of her legislation, in committee meetings where her voice was interrupted more than her white male colleagues combined, in articles that praised her feisty energy but never once mentioned her courtroom victories, in whispered comments from donors worried she wasn't relatable enough for suburban voters, in every hallway where power pretended not to see her, and every room she entered anyway. The Appearance Equity Act wasn't just a response to one insult. It was the accumulation of 1,000 moments of erasure that women like Jasmine had endured with a smile and a plan. And as the news broke, across cable channels, Twitter feeds, and university forums, the reaction was immediate. Labor organizations praised it. Civil rights groups endorsed it. Some corporations tried to stay neutral. Others panicked. But one video clip rose above the noise, Jasmine standing outside the Capitol steps, saying directly into the camera, "This bill isn't about making fashion political. It's about ending the lie that dignity only comes dressed in one color, one hair texture, one suit. The way we wear our identity is not a threat to your workplace. Your bias is." That sentence was played on every major network that night. It was played in classrooms. It was played in hair salons. It was even played during Sunday sermons in churches where girls once got sent home for wearing braids. Back in her office, Jasmine watched it all unfold with a quiet stillness. She didn't celebrate. She calculated. Because the truth was, passing the bill would be a battle. Hearings would come. Pushback would rise. Opponents would frame it as unnecessary, as symbolic, as divisive. But Jasmine had heard it all before. And this time, she wasn't coming to ask for understanding. She was coming with numbers, with voices, with legal firepower and cultural momentum at her back. The world had watched her lashes flutter while she delivered federal indictment statistics. Now it would watch as she dismantled the coded language of professionalism, one policy at a time. Because in every corner of the country, girls were watching. Girls who had been pulled out of class for having twists. Girls whose job interviews ended the moment they walked in with a head wrap. Girls who had been told to be less before they were ever allowed to speak. Jasmine wasn't just legislating. She was translating every insult ever hurled at women like them and answering it with law, with policy, with purpose. And this time, no one could say it was just makeup. The bill had been filed, the cameras had faded, and the crowd had finally begun to thin. But for Jasmine Crockett, history was never made inside the hearing room. It was made in the moment you walked out, still standing tall. The sun was low when she stepped outside, casting everything in amber. The marble stairs, the Capitol dome behind her, the shoulders of the aides quietly following a few steps behind. The sky above Washington, D.C. burned in streaks of gold and violet, like the end of something monumental, or the beginning of something even bigger. Jasmine paused at the top of the steps, letting the air touch her skin, her eyes squinting slightly against the fading light. She didn't speak. She didn't rush. She simply stood there for a breath, arms relaxed, chin slightly raised, and let the wind move gently across her face. Her lashes didn't flutter. They held firm, like flags refusing to lower in the wind. Behind her, someone opened the heavy courthouse doors with a creak that sounded like the end of an era. Before her, waiting at the base of the stairs, were reporters, not just political journalists, but national press, students, activists, women holding phones instead of microphones. All of them waiting not for scandal, but for something far rarer: closure. The air was quiet but tight, like a bowstring drawn, not yet released. Jasmine began her descent, each step steady, heels clicking in rhythm with the heartbeat of a nation that had watched her fight with grace, sharp enough to slice through bias. Flashes began to pop again, not the hostile kind she had once braced for, but the kind that now tried to capture something bigger than a headline. She didn't slow down. She didn't perform. She simply walked, head held high, black coat fluttering behind her, like a cloak pulled straight from legend. No one called out questions at first. No one interrupted. There was something reverent about it. Something like watching a survivor exit the battlefield with her flag still raised. When she reached the final step and turned slightly toward the crowd, the silence cracked. It came from a young reporter in the front, maybe early 20s, press badge crooked on his jacket, voice a little too soft for the moment, but honest all the same. "Congresswoman Crockett," he called out, one hand raised half-heartedly. She stopped, tilted her head just slightly to let him speak. "Do you think," he asked, a smile creeping nervously across his face, "that your lashes made history today?" There was a beat, just a beat, where no one knew how to react. Some chuckled quietly. Others inhaled like they'd just heard a line too risky to ask aloud. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes or wave it off. She looked directly at him and then beyond him, at the dozens of other faces watching, holding phones, waiting for something to remember. She smiled, not the practiced political smile, not the courtroom smirk. This one was real, slow, warm, and lined with steel. "No," she said, her voice soft enough to feel intimate, even among a crowd. "My lashes didn't write history." She paused there, on purpose. "History is written by those who refuse to bow their heads." And then she leaned in, eyes locked with the young man who asked it, lashes still casting long shadows under the golden sky. Even if they're wearing false ones. The moment froze. For 1 second the world held its breath. Then the crowd reacted. Not with applause, but with stunned, breathless awe. People lowered their phones like they'd just seen the final frame of a movie that would never leave them. The quote hit social media within seconds, already stamped across photos and headlines before Jasmine had even turned away. "History is written by those who don't bow, even in false lashes." The line wasn't just memorable. It was a weapon, a shield, a scripture. And she had said it with the kind of effortless calm that comes not from media training, but from surviving enough battles to know exactly how power bends when it's held by someone who knows what to do with it. She didn't linger after that. She nodded once, a quiet thank you, then turned and began walking again. Not hurried, not slow, just purposeful. Her team followed behind, speechless, reverent. One aide reached up to wipe her own cheek, caught between pride and something far heavier. The kind of emotion that only comes when you've seen a wall crack that you've spent your whole life trying to climb. Jasmine didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, something had shifted permanently. A courtroom, a party, a country, and maybe, just maybe, a generation of girls who would now walk into their future wearing lashes. Not to impress anyone, but to remind themselves they never had to shrink to fit a system that was never built for them in the first place. Back inside the courthouse, someone would later find a copy of the DOJ file she had presented. It had been left on the bench, neatly closed but with a note on top. "Section B6 has a face now." The clerk who found it took a photo. That photo made the rounds too. It became another part of the story. A small one, quiet but powerful. Just like Jasmine's walk down those stairs. And somewhere, in classrooms, in dorm rooms, in family kitchens lit by television screens, in late-night news coverage, the moment replayed again and again. Not the insults, not the data, not the arguments, but the image of a woman walking out of the lion's den without a single part of herself dimmed. Still dressed how they said she shouldn't. Still speaking how they told her not to. Still seen, still standing, and still exactly who she had been the whole time. And maybe that was the most revolutionary thing of all. And as Jasmine disappeared into the golden light, heels steady on the pavement and the final echoes of her words still hanging in the air, one truth remained. This was never just about lashes. This was about the long war between power and perception, and who gets to hold both at the same time. It was about how systems aren't always broken. Sometimes they're functioning exactly as designed, to elevate some and erase others. Jasmine's story exposed what happens when someone refuses to be erased. Not with anger, not with violence, but with intellect wrapped in elegance, and truth delivered through every fiber of her presence. It was about the weight of being too often told you're too much, too loud, too proud, too visible, and the miracle of standing tall anyway. It was about walking into rooms where you were never meant to sit, never meant to speak, and deciding to do both with red nails, long lashes, and evidence that can't be ignored. Jasmine didn't rewrite the rules. She held them up like a mirror and dared the system to look at itself. And when it did, even for a moment, the reflection cracked. The lesson was not that Jasmine triumphed despite being mocked. It was that she never let the mocking define the battlefield. She understood something bigger, that injustice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers in boardrooms, disguises itself as dress codes, and hides behind language like professionalism or standards. She faced a wall that countless others had hit before, a wall of expectations, coded rules, and polite erasure. And she didn't just climb over it. She painted it, named it, and made sure everyone watching finally saw it for what it was. Because sometimes the fight isn't against what's said out loud. It's against the weight of everything people believe about you before you've spoken a single word. Jasmine spoke anyway. And in doing so, she carved space not just for herself, but for thousands who had been edited out before the first page even turned. But the most radical message wasn't in her fight. It was in her refusal to change. Jasmine didn't dilute her tone, her dress, her rhythm, her identity, just to be palatable. She didn't trim herself down to fit a mold. She didn't meet the system in the middle. She walked in whole and demanded the system widen instead. That's what made her dangerous. That's what made her unforgettable. In a world that rewards assimilation, she chose authenticity, and not the sanitized kind. The kind with roots, scars, and sparkle. The kind that doesn't ask to be accepted, but arrives already enough. The kind that carries the story of a mother rejected for her skin tone, a daughter told to blend in, and a congresswoman who decided to rise anyway, with everything they told her to leave behind still intact. And in her rising, she reminded us that justice isn't sterile. It isn't colorless. It doesn't come in neutral tones or fit only inside court transcripts. Real justice is messy. It's loud. It wears hoops and speaks with rhythm and carries the scent of memory on its breath. Real justice feels like truth wrapped in pain that's finally been seen. Jasmine didn't just defend herself. She opened a door that had been welded shut and showed the world what walks through when you finally stop guarding it with bias. She reminded us that dignity isn't reserved for the quiet, that strength isn't found in silence, that leadership isn't one size fits all, and never was. The injustice she faced wasn't new, it was generational. It was written into dress codes, hiring practices, school suspensions, court decisions, and magazine covers that all quietly whispered, "Be less." But Jasmine's answer was a masterclass in being more. More present, more visible, more unwavering, more her. And in doing so, she reminded us that survival is only the beginning. What comes next? The power to speak, lead, inspire. That's where legacy lives. Her story wasn't about proving she belonged. It was about exposing the lie that said she didn't. And that lie cracked wide open the moment she turned an insult into a movement, a section code into a mirror, and a pair of lashes into a statement of defiance heard across the nation. But the true human message wasn't even about law. It was about visibility, about the quiet trauma of constantly shrinking yourself just to be allowed in, and the unimaginable relief of finally realizing you don't have to. Jasmine's message burned through every camera lens and transcript. You do not have to become invisible to be respected. You do not have to choose between your identity and your opportunity. You do not have to change to deserve to be heard. And you certainly don't have to apologize for taking up space. Not in a courtroom, not in a classroom, not in Congress, not anywhere. Especially not when the truth is on your side. And so, the story doesn't end with a headline or a hashtag. It ends with a shift. A mother who finally wears her natural hair to work. A student who submits a college essay about her culture instead of hiding it. A teacher who lets her girls wear braids without fear of detention. A hiring manager who rethinks what professional really means. A girl in Mississippi who keeps her lashes long and her law books open. Because Jasmine made her believe she could do both. The message isn't that one woman changed everything. It's that one woman, by refusing to shrink, gave everyone else the courage to stop shrinking too. And that's the lesson. That power isn't something you're given. It's something you reclaim, breath by breath, step by step, word by word. That dignity isn't earned by compromise, but by conviction. That your full self, your hair, your voice, your fire, your truth, is not the price of entry. It's the proof that you belong. Jasmine didn't just survive injustice. She named it, faced it, outlived it, and when the moment came, she didn't flinch. She stood, and so should we. But legacies don't live in marble halls or social media trends. They live in what you choose to do next. So don't let this story end with her. Don't let the moment pass like another headline, another clip, another name whispered in a wave of outrage that dies down before anything changes. Stand in what she stood for. Call out the quiet bias. Challenge the dress codes. Ask why qualified still looks like one kind of face. Sit in the meetings they never thought you'd walk into. And when you speak, speak in your own voice, not the one they trained you to copy. Support legislation like the Appearance Equity Act. Write to your representatives. March when marching matters. Donate when dollars speak louder than hashtags, and vote like you're building a future where no one has to strip themselves to be seen as competent. Don't wait for someone to hand you the microphone. Walk to the front, take it, and tell your story. Even if your lashes are long, your nails are loud, or your truth shakes the room. Because the injustice Jasmine faced isn't hers alone. It's stitched into every office that polices hair before credentials, every court that labels dignity as attitude, every boardroom that demands invisibility in the name of professionalism, and it will keep breathing as long as we remain silent. So speak, not just in defense of yourself, but in defense of everyone who's ever been told to tone it down just to be taken seriously. Hold the mirror Jasmine held. Make them see what they're pretending not to. Make them explain why equality still comes with fine print. Write op-eds, organize panels, educate your HR departments, share stories that challenge the rules pretending to be neutral. When someone says, it's just appearance, ask them, then why are you so afraid of mine? And if you're tired of fighting to be heard, tired of being mistaken for the assistant in your own meeting, tired of doing everything right and still being treated like you don't belong, know this. Your exhaustion is not weakness. It is proof you have carried the weight they never had to. It is fuel. Use it. You are not alone. You are part of a rising chorus of voices that will no longer be silenced by policy, by culture, or by fear. And if you don't know where to begin, start where Jasmine did, by refusing to lower your head. Let them see your pride before your resume. Let them hear your truth before your title. Because what changes the world is not polished compliance. It's bold, visible courage. Support the women doing this work every day, the ones creating scholarship funds, mentoring law students, rewriting HR policy, sitting on diversity councils, and running for office with hair that breaks the mold. Share their work, amplify their wins, defend them when the backlash comes, because it always does. Join coalitions pushing for workplace equity. Push companies to back their DEI statements with action. Make space for those who've been pushed out and protect the ones walking in behind you. Because progress isn't just about breaking doors down. It's about holding them open long enough for others to step through. And when they try to belittle you, when they laugh or roll their eyes, or use words like dramatic, intense, too political, not a team player, remember Jasmine. Remember what they said to her. Remember how they tried to reduce her to lashes, to gloss, to fashion, and how she turned it into fire, into legislation, into legacy. Remember how they mocked Section B6 and she gave it a face. Remember that dignity is not what you wear, it's what you refuse to remove. And remember that silence is never neutral. Silence is what allows injustice to rest, recover, and reload. So don't be silent. Don't be small. Don't wait for permission to take up space. You've already earned it. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.